One of the key things and metrics that people are held to when coming into a business is accountability. And the accountability word, I think, Dennis, that's a term that it seems to make a lot of sense just by the very definition of it. But in practice, it's really not really what we think it is.
No, I mean, it's we want people to perform, but when you hear the word held accountable, look at the first word held. It gives that connotation that it's not the employee, it's me as the manager doing all the work. And so it actually sets the wrong tone.
It's interesting conversation, and I think that it's something that people overlook. There's so much involved with this. And today we have Robert Avinger, who is with Avinger Consulting, somebody who really understands the concept of leadership and what this topic means. He's put a great deal of thought into it. And I think this is a conversation that it's just kind of that first layer of the onion. And I think Robert gives us a good idea of how we should be approaching some of your management styles, and especially the idea of where this concept fits in. So let's take a listen.
WFH with two guys. Now here's Benny and Dennis.
Dennis, I think about different leadership styles, and through the course of time, before I started my company, and I know, we've had this discussion before, leadership can can make or break a company. The styles that I've seen over the years, the techniques, the effective leaders and the ones that weren't effective, it can be brutal for people, and they might not know it.
It's a wide gap sometimes. And and
Mhm.
because there are some leaders that are natural leaders, there's some people that grow into it, and there's some that get it and don't deserve it. And so, thinking back to all the different people that I've had as leaders, I mean, there's good and there's bad. And I mean, it's really easy to identify them too, if you think about it.
Yeah, and one of the techniques that I was exposed to early on, and we've heard this over the years, Dennis, is that the idea of holding someone accountable, right? And when leaders say, I need to hold somebody accountable, they're kind of already late to the game. And this whole concept and really what that all implies, I think this is a big discussion. So we have the expert today, Robert, is going to talk to us a little bit about, kind of his thoughts and ideas about that. But Robert, thank you for coming on the podcast today.
Well, thank you very much, Benny. I appreciate being labeled an expert. We'll see,
Yeah,
right?
that you are. That you are.
You
Well,
are.
Thank you.
absolutely. Well, Robert, listen, this is an interesting topic because I think at some point in our lives, we've had this exposure. I even think about this accountability thing when you brought this up, like back to my parents and being disciplined as a kid, right? You got to be held accountable for your actions. Certainly when I was in school, that type of methodology was evident. But give me your thoughts on that. What's your thinking about, like, when people are being held accountable? Logically speaking, it sounds like it would be a good idea,
Yeah.
but in practice, I think you have a different take on that.
Yeah, I do. I've been thinking a lot about it just in the sense of thinking about leadership, especially as we kind of evolve into, the context of today with lots of change and innovation and things moving so fast. And I think back a lot, and like to Dennis's point, we reflect often on the leaders that we've had over time. Who are the good ones? Who are the not so good ones, et cetera. And oftentimes when I'm thinking about that, I think about this notion of being held accountable. And where my mind immediately goes is when I feel like I'm being held accountable by someone else, I feel some sense of resentment about that. I feel some sense of disconnect from that and defensiveness, or things that actually don't necessarily align with performance and being productive and actually excelling at what you do. So with that, I began to kind of think a little bit about that whole construct of accountability and about a different way of thinking about it.
Yeah, and Robert, I mean, you say the word held. I mean, it just automatically your brain starts thinking, okay, if I'm held, that means someone's holding me back, someone's restraining me, or it.
Yeah, it's very
it
restrictive. It's very restricting. Yeah.
and I
It's
think
condescending too.
that's where as a leader, yeah, you want everyone to be accountable, but you don't want to hold people accountable. That's the big thing.
Yeah. So then the question really becomes, well, where does accountability exist? And for me, accountability is purely 100% a personal choice. I have full agency, as does every individual in the world, has full agency on whether they are going to show up and actually choose to be accountable. And by accountable, meaning do what they said they would do, follow through on their commitments, get their job done, deliver on expectations, all of those things that we know or expect people to do as part of their employment. But that's really on me to choose accountability versus my manager to hold me accountable.
This is interesting. As you kind of were going through that, I was thinking a little bit, there's got to be a hidden cost when you're using accountability as a policing mechanism in your workplace. I mean, what's kind of that hidden cost associated with that?
Well, I think there's a lot. When you think about, what's one of the things we've often heard and the data points to it is the number one reason people leave organizations is not money, right? It is the relationship with their manager.
Mm.
If I've got a relationship with my manager in which that feels restrictive or restraining or in some way kind of over indexed on directive by being held accountable, that's going to create a disconnect with my manager. And I'm much more likely to leave that organization because of that. So I think some of that hidden cost is around turnover, engagement, some of those kind of big HR data points that we like to look at as we think about the health of an organization.
So, Robert, if I'm a manager and I've been holding people accountable, how can what are attributes of good management styles that allow people to be accountable but not held accountable?
Yeah, so great question, Dennis. And it points to if I'm saying that a manager's job is not to hold someone accountable, what is the manager's job in that whole construct of accountability? And I would say it's simply the manager's job is to create the conditions in which someone chooses accountability. In other words, how can a manager make it really easy for one of their direct reports to actually show up every day and choose to be accountable? And so as a leader begins to think about that, what goes into the conditions that make it easy for someone to choose accountability? And for me, I've been thinking about it, and I think there are three things. Maybe I'll say them real quickly and then we can double click on each one. So
Yep.
inspiration, clarity, and partnership. Those three things kind of are the core factors that make the conditions right for someone to show up and choose to be accountable.
So, Robert, say those three. Say those three again. I like those.
Inspiration, clarity, and partnership. So we can double click on each one. If I think about inspiration, for example, how do you make sure as a manager, how are you connecting your people to the impact that their work is having in such a way that they get inspired by that impact? Now, there's a great story, and this actually comes from a book called The Story Doesn't, but the writer tells the story. It's a book called The Power of Mattering.
Mm.
And there's a short article in the Harvard Business Review. I think it's probably about a year old now, but it takes that whole notion of belonging, sense of belonging, which we've all heard about is important in organizations. And it drills down one level further to talk about the power of mattering. Why does my work matter? And in the book or in the article, he tells a great story of back when John F. Kennedy was president, he was on a tour of NASA and he walked by a custodian at the NASA complex and he stopped and he asked the custodian, tell me, what is it that you do here? And the custodian looked at him and said, I'm helping put a man on the moon. So that speaks to that notion of how does your work connect to the greater vision, the greater purpose of the organization? How does your work make an impact? And then whatever that looks like for the individual that you're leading or managing, how do you make sure that you're generating that level of inspiration? And part of it also includes you got to get to know the people, right? What inspires them? What is it about their work, et cetera, that can be inspiring, and making sure that they connect to that.
Robert, I'm assuming culture plays into that one. I mean, you and I worked at Healthways, and I mean, there was all kinds of things in that building that helped people understand what we were doing and why we were doing it. Even though you might have been in IT or HR, you knew that we were all there to try to help people live a better life.
Yeah, lots of customer stories and all sorts of things that we shared to make sure people connected to not just the importance of what I do every day, or the impact of that, but also the greater impact on how we were creating a healthier world, one person at a time, right?
Yep.
That was our mission.
That was it.
Hey, so
20
Robert,
some years ago.
Yeah.
yeah, I was there too, and
Uh,
kind of in the on the side of that. But Robert, what role does self-awareness play in a leader's ability to kind of foster that accountability, to kind of foster that?
For me, it is a leader's ability to kind of compartmentalize their own needs. As every single individual out there wants to be successful and they want to look good, right? They want to make sure we're performing. And oftentimes as leaders, we get so grounded in our own needs that the behavior associated with meeting our own needs is to be more directive or more kind of restrictive on the people that we lead because they're the conduit to our success, if you will.
Mm.
And so the self awareness of being able to kind of compartmentalize our own needs, park it to the side, and focus on the needs of the people that we lead. I think for me, that's a big part of the self-awareness piece, the ability to do that. And that allows a manager to really get to the heart of what is it that's going to inspire someone.
There, it's a word I'm trying to figure out, like behaviors or character traits that leaders who create that type of accountability from those, as opposed to those who demand it. Are there specific ways that you can, and that might be too big of a broad of a question, but does
well,
that make
Benny,
sense?
I just think back to leaders that I've had that were good. You hit on that. They got to know you. They weren't my
Mm,
best friend, but they knew my family. They knew what inspired me. They knew that I enjoyed, time off with my family at certain times or whatever. So they didn't spend a ton of time with me, but they got to know versus the ones that just never walked by and would even talk to you other than when they barked at you and wanted an order or information. And so it's the ones that just say, "Hey, let's go to lunch every once in a while." It's the off the wall things. It's common sense stuff, but they don't apply it sometimes.
Yeah, Dennis, you went right to where my head went when Benny asked the question, which is managers that do this really well have kind of in their heart and soul believe in the value of human connection,
Hmm.
right? And the connectedness that allows for a deeper relationship, which allows for kind of creating these conditions for choosing accountability. And I think, Benny, to your point, that question is kind of an overarching question. So one of the other, I mentioned three pieces:
Hmm.
inspiration, clarity, and partnership. So we've talked a little bit about inspiration. Clarity is the other one, or one of the other two, and that's kind of an obvious one.
mhm.
Nothing shuts down accountability like ambiguity, right? If someone doesn't really know what's expected of them, if they don't really have the resources and the tools that they need in order to be successful, if the goalposts keep shifting, right? Which we hear that a lot in a
Right.
rapidly changing environment. My manager's, he's changing the goalpost every day, et cetera.
Sure.
If all
Mhm.
that stuff exists, then that's going to impact my choice, my choosing to be accountable. So the more a manager can really create a high degree of sustained and consistent clarity, that's going to be a big factor in those creating that condition where people choose to be accountable. So that's the second one. That's of the three, that's probably the most clear.
Mm.
The third one is not.
Well, and Robert, I think back again. I'm thinking back to all these managers I've had. The ones that I liked working for, they would give you, think of a road, and they would give you the parameters of, "Hey, I need you to stay within these lanes," but the lanes were pretty wide, and then they'd get out of the way, and so you kind of knew where you lived, and so if you started getting close to that line, they may have had some indicators that would flag it, and they'd come and say, "Hey, you're going over the yellow line or whatever." But it's like it allowed me to be accountable and they got out of the way. It allows you to be you and do what you do best.
Yes.
That's and it all goes back to hiring the right people. So if you hire the right people and you give them parameters and get out of the way, it's amazing how they can perform and do amazing work.
Yeah. And Dennis, you bring up a great question. And, clarity is not telling people exactly what to do, when to do it, how to do it,
Right.
and being kind of limited in a degree of flexibility there, right? So that's not what I'm talking about when I talk about clarity. What I am talking about is a general sense of what the job is, why it matters, how to do it, How do you measure success? Some of those kind of key factors.
Are there any legal things you gotta be aware of or what that kind of stuff? But then get out of the way for them.
And then as long as there's a degree of flexibility in there, you give someone the flexibility to actually get in
Yep,
there and do it and use their brain, then that's a big factor of clarity as well.
yep.
So,
No, that's good.
and then the
So,
third thing, and I think, Benny, this gets to maybe the heart of the matter of your
yeah.
question earlier, is partnership.
Mm,
As a manager, if I'm creating the conditions for you to choose accountability, I've connected to you to the inspiration of the work. I've generated the clarity that you need in order to be successful. Now I can either just sit back and hope you get it right, or I can show up as a trusted partner
mm,
and really be someone that you can count on to help you when you need it, to answer questions when you have them, to nudge you in ways through the challenges. And by nudging, I mean more coaching than directing. And that for me is many ways the art of leadership, is how to be a trusted partner for someone.
mhm.
And back to your question, that kind of a core value around the importance of relationships and the value of relationships is a key aspect of how to do that.
And I think in that partnership as the employee, you've got some responsibility to keep that leader informed. Yeah, because the last thing that the leader wants is a surprise. So, I mean, if something's going
Absolutely.
off the rails, you got to let them know if you're the employee. And again, if it's a partnership, they're not gonna get upset. They're gonna coach. They're gonna help you because you learn from mistakes. If we all did it perfectly, they wouldn't need half of us. So, so it's like that's their chance to step in and give guidance and coaching. But there, unfortunately, a lot of them then step in and try to do the work, and it's like that's where you go back to you took the accountability, not the employee, and so that's that partnership piece is that true communication back and forth between each other.
That's right. That's that whole, you're speaking of that old analogy of the monkey on your back. Don't give me your monkey, right? Or don't
Yeah,
take my monkey. Or it's like,
yep,
that's not really accountability. That's passing the buck, or that's, you know,
yep. And
You know,
I've been a leader before. And again, if you tell me 3 or 4 weeks before the problem, I can help you. If you tell me the day of the problem happening, there's not a lot I can do to help you avoid the
yeah.
ramifications that are going to happen. So again, the employee has some responsibility in that partnership part as well.
Yeah, that's part of the accountability. Choosing to
Yeah,
be accountable means kind of maintaining that partnership and playing a role in that.
yeah, cool.
one of the things that Dennis had mentioned earlier was about culture. And so one of the things I was just thinking about is that how does culture support or sabotage accountability or the ability to do that? Do you have any thoughts on that, Robert?
So I have a belief model, if you will, which says that really culture, the middle of the culture is set by, or evolves with, or is influenced by the kind of conversations that leaders have. And by leaders, I mean kind of executives. So, what kind of conversations are leaders having? Are they having conversations around learning or blaming? Are they having conversations around kind of results and performance, et cetera? And then it's the middle of the organization that is the culture multiplier. So in many ways, I think of um, and the middle of, I say the middle of the organization because that's where the majority of an organization reports into. Right, you've
Mhm.
got middle managers. Most of the organization is reporting into those managers. And for me, the employee manager relationship is the most important relationship in an organization. That's where culture gets kind of really cemented, if you will, is what that relationship is like. So if leaders, executives aren't coming from the mindset of holding people accountable versus creating the conditions where people choose to be accountable, you're going to have a disconnect there. And that's going to, for me, that's going to sabotage a manager's effort to really create this kind of environment. So what is leadership at the top doing to support through the conversations they're having, the messaging they're delivering, how they show up every day? How is that being supportive of this whole notion of accountability, or how is it kind of working um, kind of in tension with it?
So
Answer
if
your
I'm
question.
in, like, if let me ask if this, 'cause I think I'm going to use your words here, but
Yeah.
it sounds like it's along the lines of accountability is more of a cultural artifact rather than a standalone behavior, right?
I think so. Yeah,
Yeah.
sure. I mean, as you look across an organization, do you have individuals showing up to work every day, choosing to be accountable? And if you are, I would say that's a cultural trait. That's an aspect of your culture that is a real strength. Don't, I would say, right, your culture is maybe one of more fear-based or
Mm.
punitive in nature.
And
Mhm.
Robert, I'm assuming when you go into a company, you can tell pretty quickly what those cultures are like, I would assume.
It doesn't take long to, in having conversations with people,
Hmm.
it doesn't take long to begin to understand what's really happening there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just by the nature of the conversations that you're having.
All right. So I marked it right here. I just looked at the clock and
Yeah.
realized it's already 23 minutes here,
Yeah.
Dennis. You always tell when we're into these conversations because like we
That's a good,
forget
I'll
that
take that as a good
that's a
thing.
good
It's
thing.
a good thing.
It is a very good thing. Do you think that there's anything that you've left out, or is there anything that you kind of want to tie up on any of the items that we talked about?
I don't think so. I think I can just circle back to
Three
that
things.
that mindset shift that
Yeah.
leaders need to make, just
Okay.
shifting from my job as holding someone accountable to my job as creating the conditions in which it makes it easy for someone to choose accountability.
Robert, question for you though. I'm just thinking from an employee's perspective. If the leader shifts, they've got to communicate this to the employees because some of the employees have been held accountable for a long time, which means they've been kind of under a dictatorship. They've got to give that clarity and explain, here's how we're going to be working and doing things a little differently, I would assume, which you might want to
Yeah,
hit on.
I think that's fair. It's also not, maybe this is a point to make. It's not a light switch kind of
Right.
thing. Um,
But it's,
this takes time.
yeah, I would point that out.
Yeah.
It's not where you're going to switch from holding to given the employee, but it's a transition. You've got to go through these steps. You've got to develop the relationships, the partnerships.
Yep.
You got
And
to
Benny,
create the
maybe this is where I could tie back to, as you think about making this mindset shift, there's a piece of this which is developing your employees to embrace this whole construct.
right.
And that's where it points back to that this isn't a training exercise.
Mm-mm.
Right? This isn't teaching you a new skill. This is developing a new mindset.
So Robert, I'm a manager that's been holding people accountable, and I agree that I want to switch to this. I'm assuming this is not a light switch that I just flip and it's done, because the employees would be confused if they were used to being held accountable versus now taking accountability. If I'm a manager, what do I do? How do I do this thing?
Well, yeah. So to your point, Dennis, this is about a mindset shift for the leader, right? From a mindset of my job is to hold you accountable to my mindset is to to create the conditions in which it makes it easy for you to choose to be accountable. And to your point, that's not a light switch. You can't just walk in on a Monday morning and say, all right, I'm going to start creating the conditions for you to choose to be accountable and hope it works. This is a journey, right? This is a marathon, not a sprint. And in many ways, it's a developmental journey for the employees. You've got to also develop them to shift their own mindset about accountability. Maybe their whole career, they've been kind of held under a thumb, being held accountable by managers. And now all of a sudden they're experiencing something totally different. And it's like mind blowing and they don't even know what to do. So you've got to create an opportunity to really work with them and developing them. And if I remember correctly, the last podcast I did with you guys, we talked about the difference between development and training.
Right.
So this is not a training exercise. So you're not training a new skill or a new policy or a process, et cetera. This is developing a way of thinking about how I show up every day and do my work through inspiration, clarity, and partnership. And that takes time. It certainly takes time.
Robert, this has been a very interesting conversation. I think that there's so much more that we absolutely could go down. Listen, we're running out of time. And I know that there'll be some people who have some questions for you that we can answer here. What's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
The best way is through email. So my email address is robert@avingerconsulting.com. Avinger is I always say Avenger with an I, so Avinger. So Robert at AvingerConsulting.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn and shoot me a LinkedIn message. I'm pretty good about checking that. And but I'd love to, if any of your listeners have questions, I'd love to engage. That'd be fun.
Robert, Avinger Consulting, thank you so much for stopping by today, giving us a little bit of understanding about accountability and where it fits in your organization. Thanks so much for stopping by. We really appreciate it.
I really appreciate it too. It's a pleasure, and I enjoyed the conversation.
Robert, again, thanks a lot. And listeners, reach out to Robert. This is a good one. It'll help your employees be more engaged. I guarantee it.
Absolutely. Thanks again.
Thank you.
You've been listening to WFH with Two Guys. We'll see you next time.